Well, our next guest thought he would never vote for Donald Trump. But like millions of others, he did. Take a look.
Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Donald Trump stunned the nation by becoming the 45th president of the United States. His victory over Hillary Clinton sent shockwaves around the world. But many who voted for Trump never thought they would. Steve Strang is the CEO of Charisma Media. Like many people of faith, Steve supported Trump only because Ted Cruz dropped out of the race. After he personally interviewed Trump last fall, Steve became part of a team of Christian leaders who backed the future president. In his book, God and Donald Trump, Steve shares the reasons why he got behind this unlikely candidate and explores the possibility of a divine intervention involved in his election.
Please welcome back to the 700 Club a good friend and author of an interesting book called God and Donald Trump, Stephen Strang. Steve, good to have you.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
Why Trump? Why'd you pick him?
Well, first of all, it was the alternative. I mean, look who we had to vote for. But also, I began to see what a lot of Christians saw was that God was raising up this man who we didn't even necessarily like. And people have asked me why I wrote the book, and I tell them, you know, Hillary Clinton wrote a book called What Happened? And my book answers the question.
That's what...
And that is that God intervened because people were praying for some kind of shift in our country.
Right.
So God answered our prayers in a way we didn't expect, with a man we didn't even necessarily like. Although when you get to know him or spending time around him, you find out that he's very different than he's portrayed in the media. He's kind and loving. Obviously, something's happening in his life, and has happened in the last 10 years.
You pointed out in this book about his relationship with his children. That says a lot about a human being, is what kind of kids does he raise.
Even Hillary Clinton complimented him in the debate, remember? And that does tell you a lot about a man. And he has very strong family values. He was raised in the church. He was raised a Presbyterian. Of course, he lived most of his life as a secular billionaire. But about 10 years ago, something happened in his life. He became much more serious. He kind of cleaned up his act. So the things that we don't like about Donald Trump, other than maybe the tweet he did yesterday, is from, you know, before that era. And back in that era, he called Paula White one day. You know, she's on TV, and she was like shocked. Why did he call? He said, "I've been watching you on TV." And apparently he watches Christian TV quite a bit. And he said, would you come to Trump Tower and talk to me? And she did, and a friendship ensued. And then all these years later, when he was wanting to run in 2012, he called Paula and said, you need to invite some of your friends who know how to pray. He said, I'm not going to ask them for their support. I'm going to ask them to pray. And of course, he decided not to run. In 2016, he also surrounded himself with Christians fairly early. He seems to enjoy it. He seems to enjoy having people pray for him. And when I started seeing these pictures that were on YouTube of Christian leaders reaching out their hand and praying for him, I was just flabbergasted. I mean, what politician even lets you touch them, let alone pray for them? And you've been around presidents a lot more than I have, but the few times I've been around 4 presidents now, and never were prayers even prayed. Yet Donald Trump seems to enjoy this. And I believe that there is something going on in his heart. And I believe that God has raised him up.
You pointed out several people that you admire who had prophetic word way, way back, years in advance, that he was going to be president. Can you tell us about those?
Well, I documented in Charisma magazine, and we put it in the book, 4 specific prophecies. There were more than that, but starting with Chuck Pierce in 2008, and then a fireman from Central Florida in 2011, a very unlikely prophet, and more recently, Lance Wallnau, who believed that God was raising him up like Cyrus, you know, who was not a godly king at all, yet he saved Israel. And finally, Frank Amedia, who actually, in the book, I tell a story about how he gave Donald Trump a prophetic word, and it's never been reported. Back at the time, he told me about it, and he wanted to keep it all hush-hush. And, of course, I asked him, and he gave him this prophetic word that he felt the Lord gave to him, put it in an envelope, and one of his staffers gave it to Trump when he got on his airplane. And it basically said, and it's in the book, that if you humble yourself before me, you'll be the next president of the United States. And we can only speculate what Donald Trump said in his airplane in that setting, but I believe that he probably has humbled himself the best he can. You know, he's an imperfect person like all of us are, very brash, but I don't really believe that he's the prideful person that he's often portrayed.
You pointed out about his mother, too, who's from Scotland, and they were there in that Hebrides revival that was so powerful. Could you talk about her? She must have been quite an amazing woman.
She was raised a very strict Presbyterian, the Free Church. The Scots call it the Wee Frees.
Yeah.
And they were very fervent people. Now, she moved to the United States about 10 years before that revival. But that revival broke out among these people that she knew. And she was in some kind of very strong Christian environment growing up, and she influenced her children. She made sure that they came up in the church, that they went through confirmation. And this type of thing. And Donald Trump, you know, attended church. He was in Norman Vincent Peale's church as a young adult. And he got away from it, but now he's come back. He, like, as I said before, he surrounds himself with Christian leaders who know how to pray.
You also pointed out a Catholic divine who was a monk who had this word. What was his word?
Well, this is one of the surprising things. In my research, somebody sent me a link, and a Catholic priest from Rhode Island told how this Catholic holy man named Thomas Zimmer, he was an American who moved to Rome and lived there for about 30 years, and he prayed all the time and went to Mass all the time. And he told a young medical doctor in the 1980s that an American businessman named Donald Trump was going to turn America toward God. And the young doctor, you know, this medical student said, "You don't mean the billionaire from New York?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm so certain that I purchased a brick and put his name on it." And they had this thing where they brick up a door in St. Peter's every so often. And I don't understand all that stuff. But the medical student came back, established a practice in Boston. I've interviewed him. He's very credible. He only remembers this as his word. The old man came back to America in 2008 and died in 2009, so we can't ask him. But he remembered this story, mentioned it to the priest. The priest believed that it was probably true, and it went viral. That's how I happened to find out about it. And I've checked out everything, and we'll never know for sure. But I present it because it's an interesting story. And I believe that if God could talk to these people that I mentioned, who I know and respect, he could speak to a holy man. And notice he didn't say that Donald Trump would be president. He said Donald Trump would turn America toward Christ. And when I interviewed the priest, he told me that he thinks that Donald Trump has already done that. He said when he beat Hillary Clinton, he turned America toward Christ, and then, of course, since then, he's done a lot of other things.
You know, when I heard her in that debate defend partial birth abortion, the most hideous type of abortion, and saying she wouldn't touch that, I said, man, that's an extremism we can't have. But I think Trump stood in the way of that. And his policies, we've never had a president like him in history.
In the debate, he said that it would be overturned during his administration. And he's already appointed a very good Supreme Court justice, and likely will appoint some more. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well, he has the possibility of putting in maybe 3 Supreme Court judges during his time in office, which would radically change the jurisprudence having to do with abortion and family values and homosexual marriage and all that. It's amazing.
Well, our country has been going toward the left and toward immorality for a long, long time, but there's been a crescendo lately. But God's people have prayed, and I believe that God has answered our prayers, and we have a reprieve. Donald Trump is not perfect. He can't solve everything, but at least we have a reprieve, and we can be encouraged that God hears our prayers.
Well, the left has gone after him in a fashion that's never happened in our lifetime. And yet he just stood firm on all these issues. It's amazing.
Doesn't faze him.
Yeah, it really does.
He seems to be having a good time. Yeah. If it was me, I would feel awful from the stress.
Well, anyhow, did you think he's going to have an impact, a great impact in our country? And there's no question God has put his hand on him. That's your feeling. That's the premise of this book.
Exactly. And I wanted to put all this on the record because I've read several books on Trump. They don't even mention the fact that evangelicals supported Trump 82%,
amazing.
which was probably the tipping point in terms of the election.
That's right.
And they don't talk at all about what God's will is. Where is God in all this? But remember that Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention that God is involved in the affairs of man.
That's right.
And I believe that God is involved, and I'm hoping that my book, God and Donald Trump, will help to widen the discussion, and maybe some of the secular people will have to at least ask themselves, could this be true?
How's your book doing, by the way? Is it how long has it been out? Is it
It releases November 7th, today.
Oh, today is the day. Well, I'm honored that we will have the inauguration of this important book.
And Gordon gave me a very nice endorsement.
Yeah.
We got a lot of good endorsements. There are a lot of people that seem to think, we're glad you told this story. And as a journalist, you know, I've been telling these stories, but usually in magazines and in blogs. But I just felt that it was important that I go on the record and people can judge it for themselves. I don't push it down their throat. People can read it and decide for themselves.
Well, I hope it does well. Ladies and gentlemen, this book is called God and Donald Trump. It has some amazing stories of prophets who had a word way in advance of the election that Trump was going to be the next president. And, you know, it sort of seals in people's minds that this man was indeed chosen by God, which is remarkable. And thank you for writing the book.
Well, thank you.
Well, I hope it does well. It's available everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. God and Donald Trump, Stephen Strang, published, and it was an endorsement, a forward by Mike Huckabee, Governor Huckabee, with a number of endorsements on the back. And who publishes it? You published it?
I published it.
You published it. All right. Well, I hope it does well. Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. God bless you.